They laughed at his wooden gun for 3 months, until a shell buried his real weapons, and the toy started a 6-hour manhunt that ended with 19 Germans dead. October 23rd, 1944. Western Aachen. Urban combat had reduced the city to stacked layers of rubble, dust, and half-standing walls. Artillery never stopped long enough to mean anything. It only paused to reload. Sergeant William Theodore Mason was moving with his squad through a partially collapsed apartment block when the building took a direct hit. The blast didn't kill him. It erased the floor beneath his feet. He fell through smoke and debris and slammed into the basement hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. Stone dust filled his mouth. His ears rang so loudly he couldn't hear his own breathing. Somewhere above him, men were shouting, then screaming, then going silent. When the dust settled, Mason understood the situation instantly. He was alone. The staircase was half gone. The ceiling had collapsed inward, sealing the upper floor. Light filtered in through a shattered window near the ceiling, just enough to show the outlines of broken furniture, masonry, and blood. His Thompson was gone, buried under tons of concrete. His M1911 lay somewhere across the room, visible but unreachable without crossing open space directly under the hole in the floor. German voices echoed from above. Boots. Multiple men. Calm. Methodical. A clearing patrol. Mason checked his belt by instinct. Grenades gone. Spare magazines gone. His hands found only one object, still secured in its crude, hand-sewn holster. The wooden pistol. The thing they'd mocked for months. The thing Morrison called a good way to lose a hand. The thing everyone joked about whenever the fighting slowed enough for gallows humor to kick in. Mason drew it anyway. The weapon felt wrong in his hand, too light, too warm, grain pressing against his palm where steel should have been. Electrical tape bit into his fingers. He thumbed the wooden hammer back slowly. It clicked. Clean. Precise. Above him, a German voice called out. Another answered. The sound of a flashlight clicking on. Mason backed into the deepest shadow of the stairwell, heart steady, breathing slow. He didn't have a plan. He had 6 rounds, one at a time, and no retreat. The first boot appeared on the steps, and the toy was about to prove it worked. The first German came down the stairs carefully, rifle shouldered, flashlight cutting a narrow cone through the dust. He moved like a man who believed the fight was already over. Mason waited until the boot hit the 3rd step. At 15 feet, he squeezed the trigger. The wooden pistol cracked like a breaking board. In the confined space, it sounded bigger than it was, a sharp, violent snap that slammed off the stone walls. The recoil punched Mason's palm, harder than he expected, but the frame held. The firing pin struck true. The German folded backward without a sound. For half a second, nobody above understood what had happened. Shouts overlapped. Someone yelled, "Scharfschütze!" Another man cursed. Boots scrambled. Mason didn't wait. He dropped the spent casing, fingers working blind, slid a new round into the oversized chamber, seated it by feel, cocked the wooden hammer again. 6 seconds. Muscle memory born from weeks of practice everyone had laughed at. 2 Germans rushed the stairs together, textbook movement, one slightly behind the other. Mason fired again. The shot caught the lead man high in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He crashed into the second man and both tumbled down the steps in a heap of limbs and rifles. Mason was on them before they could recover. He abandoned the wooden pistol, grabbed a fallen Kar 98, and fired twice at point-blank range. Then he moved immediately because standing still was death. Above him, German radios crackled. Orders snapped back and forth. They weren't sure what they were facing now. 1 shot could be luck. 2 could be coincidence. 3 meant something else entirely. Mason fired the Kar 98 up the stairwell to pin them, then slipped into the far corner of the basement where he'd spotted a coal chute during the fall. It was barely wide enough for a man. He shoved the rifle aside, holstered the wooden pistol again, and forced himself upward into blackness. Stone scraped his shoulders. His knees screamed. He pulled himself inch by inch toward daylight. Merged into the alley behind the building, German reinforcements were already arriving at the front entrance, An entire squad moving fast, weapons ready. They believed an American patrol was trapped inside. Mason was now behind them, unseen, with 4 wooden rounds left and a city full of places to disappear. The fight was no longer about survival. It was about control. By mid-morning, the western district of Aachen no longer felt like a city. It was a maze of broken walls, collapsed roofs, and narrow alleys where sound traveled unpredictably and every shadow looked armed. Mason moved through it like a ghost. He avoided streets. He avoided open ground. He stayed inside the wreckage, slipping through smashed storefronts, blown-out apartments, and holes blasted between buildings by artillery. Every time he stopped, he listened. Every time he fired, he moved. The Germans did the opposite. They searched the way doctrine demanded, bounding forward, calling out, sweeping sectors. Radios crackled constantly. Reports went out describing coordinated American movement, multiple weapons, disciplined fire. From their perspective, this wasn't one man. It couldn't be. Mason used that assumption against them. At close range, the wooden pistol was perfect. Its report didn't carry like a rifle. In the chaos of urban fighting, it blended into falling masonry or distant fire. Mason would wait until a man stepped into a doorway or rounded a corner, fire once, then vanish before the echoes settled. He reloaded in darkness, by feel, the way he'd practiced in the barracks while men laughed and shook their heads. 1 round in. Hammer back. 6 seconds. Gone. When the situation demanded more firepower, he took it from the dead. A Walther P-38 from a stairwell, an MP-40 from a bakery floor. Ammunition scavenged 1 pouch at a time. He never carried more than he needed. Weight slowed you down. Noise got you killed. By early afternoon, German units were calling for reinforcements. What they thought was a small American patrol had grown in their minds into something worse, trained infiltrators, possibly commandos. They began sealing off blocks, committing more men, tightening the net. That only made it easier. Every additional soldier meant another predictable movement pattern, another mistake, another man who believed numbers equaled safety. Mason picked the edges apart. 1 here, 2 there, never staying long enough to be fixed. At 1,600 hours, it almost ended. 8 Germans surrounded a destroyed bakery, certain they had him. They called out in accented English, promising treatment under the Geneva Convention if he surrendered. Mason answered with a grenade through the front door. As the explosion tore through the room, he fired the wooden pistol through a rear window, dropped another man, and disappeared into the cellar before the smoke cleared. By dusk, a full platoon, 45 men, was hunting him. They never realized the truth. They weren't chasing a unit. They were chasing the echo of 4 wooden shots. The hunt ended at dusk, not with Mason's capture, but with the sudden arrival of American troops pushing into the Western District. A patrol from the 1st Infantry Division advanced cautiously through the ruins, rifles up, expecting heavy resistance. Instead, they ran straight into a confused German platoon, already stretched thin, disorganized, and exhausted from chasing a threat that never behaved the way it should have. Mason stepped out of the shadows and fell in with them without ceremony. This time, he fought with standard weapons. An M1 rifle taken from a wounded man. Proper magazines, proper ammunition, the rules the Germans understood. And in the firefight that followed, Mason killed 8 more enemy soldiers before the Germans finally broke contact and withdrew. Only then did the numbers begin to make sense. Intelligence officers worked through the reports late into the night. German radio intercepts told a parallel story, units calling for help against what they believed was an American infiltration force, describing coordinated attacks, shifting weapons, disciplined movement. No one on the German side had ever reported engaging a lone sergeant. When the casualty lists were assembled, the count stunned everyone. 4 Germans killed directly by the wooden pistol, several more wounded, 6 killed using captured weapons during the running battle. Killed during the evening engagement with the American patrol. Indirect losses from artillery called in during the chaos. 19 to 21 dead. All traceable to one man who had started the day buried in a basement with a gun carved from wood. Word spread fast. The toy soldier nickname disappeared overnight. Men who had laughed at the project now asked to see the pistol. Ordnance officers wanted measurements. War correspondents wanted photographs. Mason refused interviews and handed the gun to no one. "It saved my life," he said simply. "That's all it needs to prove." Tonnage. What mattered wasn't the weapon itself. It was the realization that something everyone dismissed as stupid had reshaped an entire battlefield for 6 hours against a force that never understood what it was really fighting. And that truth made every joke suddenly feel dangerous. The official report reduced it to numbers and bullet points, but everyone who read it understood what those pages really meant. A single sergeant, separated from his unit, had paralyzed a German platoon during a critical phase of the Aachen fighting, not with superior firepower, not with orders from above, but with an idea everyone else had written off as foolish. Army Ordnance examined the pistol weeks later. They measured the bore, weighed the frame, noted the wire-wrapped barrel, and the crude trigger geometry. Their conclusion was cautious, technical, restrained, mechanically sound, unsafe by regulation. Remarkably effective. None of that surprised Mason. He never claimed the wooden pistol was better than a factory weapon. He never pretended it was reliable, elegant, or repeatable on a large scale. He understood exactly what it was, a last answer when there were no other answers left. That was the part most people missed. The pistol didn't kill 19 Germans because it was wooden. It killed them because Mason refused to accept being helpless. In a war built on mass production, standardized doctrine, and overwhelming industrial output, the Germans expected Americans to fight a certain way. They trained for it, planned for it, countered it. Mason stepped outside that expectation. 4 quiet shots in a ruined city created confusion out of proportion to their caliber. Confusion became hesitation. Hesitation became misreporting. Misreporting pulled in more troops. More troops created more targets, more movement, more mistakes. By the time German command realized something was wrong, the damage was already done. After Aachen, Mason carried the wooden pistol for the rest of the war. He never fired it again. He didn't need to. Its value was already proven. Not as a weapon, but as proof. Proof that ingenuity mattered. Proof that initiative mattered. Proof that when systems fail, the individual still counts. Years later, when people asked about the pistol, Mason gave the same answer every time. "It wasn't about the gun," he said. "It was about not giving up when everyone else thinks you're done. It's mine." They mocked his wooden gun because it looked stupid. They stopped laughing when it worked. And long after the pistol disappeared, that lesson remained etched deeper than any after-action report. In war, the most dangerous weapon is the mind that refuses to quit. As the war moved on and the front lines shifted east, the story of the wooden pistol didn't fade the way most battlefield anecdotes did. It didn't become a punchline. It didn't shrink into rumor. It hardened into something else entirely, a quiet reference point that soldiers returned to when nothing made sense anymore. Men told it in foxholes during artillery lulls, in ruined houses while waiting for orders, in aid stations where the wounded stared at ceilings and wondered whether ingenuity had limits. Each retelling stripped away exaggeration and left behind the same core truth. When everything conventional failed, one man created an answer instead of surrendering to circumstances. What made Mason's story unsettling wasn't the body count. 19 Germans dead in a day was rare, but not unheard of. Entire platoons had been wiped out in minutes by artillery or air power. Tanks crushed dozens without seeing faces. Snipers quietly erased men, one by one. What unsettled people was how small the beginning had been. No command order, no supply chain, no factory, no doctrine. Just a man, scrap materials, and the refusal to accept helplessness. The pistol forced an uncomfortable question. How many other stupid ideas were being dismissed simply because they didn't fit expectations? How many solutions were never attempted because they looked ridiculous at first glance? German intelligence understood the implication almost immediately. Their post-action analysis didn't focus on the weapon's construction, it focused on mindset. The report noted that American soldiers demonstrated individual initiative beyond doctrinal prediction. a phrase that appeared more frequently in late 1944 as Germany's situation worsened. That observation mattered. German doctrine prized precision, hierarchy, and obedience. It created extraordinary machines but brittle systems. When conditions deviated from expectations, adaptation lagged. Mason didn't outgun German soldiers, he out-adapted them. And adaptation compounds faster than firepower ever could. From a purely technical perspective, the wooden pistol was a failure waiting to happen. It was inaccurate beyond close range. It required manual loading. It risked catastrophic failure with every shot. No military would adopt it. No engineer would recommend it. And yet, it worked when nothing else did. That contradiction haunted ordnance officers who examined the weapon. They were trained to eliminate risk, standardize performance, and minimize unpredictability. Mason's pistol embodied the opposite philosophy. It was unsafe, inefficient, and unpredictable, and exactly what the moment required. In later years, military training quietly absorbed the lesson without ever mentioning his name. Survival manuals began, including sections on field-expedient weapons. Special operations courses emphasized improvisation under equipment loss. Resistance training materials stripped firearms down to core principles, just as Mason had done instinctively. The wooden pistol vanished, but its logic didn't. For Mason himself, the story carried no triumphal edge. He never described the day as heroic. He never romanticized the killing. In post-war interviews, he spoke instead about fear, about the moment he realized no one was coming to save him, about the choice between freezing and acting. He built the pistol not because he wanted to prove anyone wrong, but because he wanted an option. That distinction mattered. He wasn't driven by ego. He was driven by preparation. While others laughed, he practiced loading in the dark. While others dismissed the project, he tested pressures, reinforced weaknesses, accepted limitations. When the moment arrived, he didn't improvise the weapon, he simply used it. That is why the story endures. It isn't about inventiveness under fire. It's about inventiveness before fire. Mason had already solved the problem long before he knew he would need the solution. Most people don't fail in crises because they lack courage. They fail because they never prepared alternatives when everything seemed fine. The wooden pistol also exposed the quiet danger of mockery. The men who laughed weren't cruel, they were normal. Humor was armor against stress, but ridicule has weight. It discourages experimentation. It enforces conformity. In war, that conformity can be lethal. After Aachen, no one in Mason's unit mocked strange ideas again. They listened instead. The irony is that Mason's pistol would never have mattered in a different context. On an open battlefield, it was useless. Against prepared defenses, irrelevant. Only in the chaos of urban combat, confined spaces, shattered visibility, fractured command did its peculiar advantages emerge. That, too, is a lesson. Effectiveness isn't absolute. It's situational. Tools become powerful when matched to context, not when optimized on paper. The Germans had better weapons by every measurable standard. Mason had the right weapon for the moment because he created it for no specific moment at all. In the decades after the war, historians debated the exact numbers. Was it 19? 21? How many were indirect? How many resulted from follow-on engagements? Those arguments miss the point. The precise count doesn't change the outcome. One man altered the tactical flow of an entire district for 6 hours. One improvised weapon triggered a cascade of misinterpretation, overreaction, and collapse. One idea, dismissed as stupid, produced consequences far beyond its material value. That's why the wooden pistol remains unsettling. It suggests that wars are not decided solely by factories, doctrines, or machines. They are also decided by minds willing to act outside expectation, minds willing to look foolish before being effective, minds willing to prepare for failure when everyone else assumes success. Mason never asked to be remembered. His obituary barely mentioned the incident. The weapon itself disappeared into obscurity. No monument marks the basement in Aachen. No plaque honors the alleyways where he moved unseen. But the lesson remains embedded in military thinking, whether acknowledged or not. When systems fail, individuals matter. When resources vanish, understanding endures. When certainty collapses, adaptability decides outcomes. They mocked his wooden gun because it violated everything they thought they knew about warfare. They stopped laughing when it worked. And long after the gun disappeared, the truth it revealed still lingers quiet, uncomfortable, and enduring. In war, the most dangerous weapon is not the most advanced. It is the one nobody expects to exist. The deeper lesson of Mason's wooden pistol is not about weapons at all. It is about how humans respond to constraint and how most people misunderstand where real power comes from when systems collapse. Modern warfare teaches soldiers to trust equipment. Rifles will be there. Ammunition will arrive. Radios will work. Doctrine will guide decisions. These assumptions are usually correct, but the most dangerous moments occur when all of them fail at once. That is when war stops being industrial and becomes personal. Mason's situation was not unique in its danger. Thousands of soldiers were isolated, buried, cut off, or disarmed during World War II. What made his case different was not bravery alone. Many men were brave. What made the difference was that Mason had already accepted the possibility of total failure long before it happened. Most people plan for success. Mason planned for absence. He asked a question few soldiers ever ask. What happens if I lose everything? No rifle, no pistol, no squad, no orders, no rescue. The wooden pistol was not optimism. It was contingency thinking taken to its logical extreme. That mindset matters far beyond warfare. Organizations, armies, and individuals often collapse not because they lack resources, but because they cannot operate outside the assumptions those resources create. When the familiar tools disappear, so does confidence. Training becomes irrelevant. Experience feels useless. Panic fills the gap. Mason never panicked, not because he was fearless, but because he had already rehearsed deprivation. This is the paradox. Preparation for failure creates calm when failure arrives. The mockery he endured is also central to the lesson. The men who laughed were not unintelligent. They were competent soldiers operating within a shared mental framework. That framework defined what was reasonable, practical, and worth attention. A wooden gun fell outside all three categories. Group logic punished deviation. That dynamic is universal. In any high-stress environment, military units, corporations, research teams, ideas that don't resemble proven solutions are often dismissed reflexively, not because they are evaluated and found lacking, but because they feel uncomfortable. They disrupt the shared sense of order. Mockery enforces conformity faster than authority ever could. Mason tolerated that pressure without becoming defensive or theatrical. He didn't argue. He didn't seek approval. He didn't try to prove anyone wrong prematurely. He worked quietly and methodically, accepting that validation might never come. This restraint is rare. Most unconventional thinkers fail not because their ideas are flawed, but because they demand recognition before results. Mason allowed the work to speak only when it had to under fire, with no audience left to convince. Another lesson lies in how the wooden pistol actually achieved its effect. It did not succeed by outperforming standard weapons. It succeeded by violating expectations. German soldiers knew the sounds of American rifles. They knew the cadence of submachine guns. They knew what engagement patterns meant and how to interpret them. Mason's pistol disrupted that entire interpretive system. Logical warfare often emerges accidentally when behavior falls outside trained recognition. Confusion is multiplicative. One uncertain report leads to cautious movement. Caution slows response. Slow response attracts reinforcements. Reinforcements amplify fear. Fear degrades communication. Communication errors create false certainty, and false certainty is lethal. Mason's 4 shots mattered less than the uncertainty they created. This principle applies everywhere humans compete. Predictability invites optimization. Unpredictability forces hesitation. Even inferior tools can dominate when they operate outside established mental models. Another overlooked lesson is Mason's relationship with limitation. He never tried to overcome the pistol's weaknesses. He embraced them. He didn't attempt long-range shots. He didn't rely on rapid fire. He didn't treat the pistol as a primary weapon. He used it only where its limitations disappeared, and its strengths, surprise, portability, discretion, became decisive. This is a master-level understanding of tools. Most failures occur when people demand a tool do what it was never meant to do. Mason shaped his tactics around the weapon's reality, not his desires. He allowed captured weapons to do what they did best, and the wooden pistol to do what it could do. Adaptation is not adding capability. It is aligning intent with constraint. The aftermath also teaches something uncomfortable about institutions. The Army studied the pistol. Analysts wrote reports. Training programs quietly absorbed the lessons. But the system never celebrated Mason publicly. Institutions are uneasy with stories that imply systems are optional. The wooden pistol suggested that centralized control, standard equipment, and rigid doctrine were not always dominant. That implication had to be absorbed quietly, translated into acceptable language, and redistributed without mythologizing the individual too loudly. This pattern repeats throughout history. Institutions adopt innovations only after they strip away the personal defiance that created them. Mason didn't mind. He never sought recognition. That indifference is itself instructive. True innovators often care more about function than legacy. There is also a moral lesson buried beneath the tactical one. Mason's story is not about glorifying killing. It is about survival under impossible pressure. War strips choices down to essentials. Mason didn't fight to prove a concept. He fought to live. This distinction matters when interpreting the story. Ingenuity is not heroic by default. It becomes meaningful only when anchored to necessity and restraint. Mason did not escalate violence unnecessarily. He disengaged when he could. He avoided contact when advantage faded. He used force precisely, then disappeared. Restraint is a form of intelligence. The final lesson is perhaps the most enduring. Humans underestimate themselves when systems are present and rediscover themselves when systems vanish. Modern life encourages dependence. Tools, infrastructure, automation, and specialization remove the need to understand fundamentals. That efficiency is powerful but brittle. When systems fail, people often freeze, waiting for restoration. Mason didn't wait. He returned to first principles. What does a gun actually do? What is absolutely required? What can be discarded? What can be replaced? That way of thinking is transferable to any crisis. Strip problems down to their core functions. Ignore tradition. Ignore aesthetics. Ignore ridicule. Build the minimum solution that allows movement forward. The wooden pistol was not a symbol of rebellion. It was a symbol of clarity. Clarity under pressure. Clarity about what matters. Clarity about what can be built when nothing is given. That is why the story still resonates decades later. Not because a wooden gun killed 19 men, but because it reminds us that when everything collapses, tools, plans, expectations, the human mind remains operational. And sometimes, that is enough to change the outcome of an entire battlefield. Another way to understand Mason's wooden pistol is to look at what it reveals about time, how people perceive it under pressure, and how mastery changes that perception. Most soldiers experience crisis as compression. Time collapses. Decisions feel rushed. Options disappear faster than they can be evaluated. Panic is not fear. The sensation that time has run out. When that happens, people default to habit, even when habit no longer fits the situation. Mason experienced the same danger, but he did not experience the same collapse of time. Because he had spent weeks slowly carving, testing, and refining the pistol, his mind had already lived through failure scenarios in advance. He had imagined misfires, structural failure, awkward reloads. He had rehearsed what not to do. When the real crisis arrived, it felt familiar, not because it was safe, but because it was already mapped. This is a crucial lesson. Rehearsal expands time. Preparation does not remove danger, but it stretches the mental space in which decisions occur. Mason did not act faster than the Germans. He acted earlier, long before the moment demanded it. When crisis arrived, he was not improvising, he was executing. Many people misunderstand improvisation. True improvisation is not invention in the moment. It is the ability to assemble known elements rapidly under stress. Mason's pistol was not improvised in the basement. It was improvised in the weeks when no one thought improvisation mattered. That distinction separates luck from repeatable performance. There is also a lesson about identity. Mason never saw himself as an inventor. He never adopted the role of the clever one. He was a sergeant doing his job, keeping himself and others alive. Because he did not attach his ego to the project, he was free to abandon it if it failed. This humility mattered. Ego-driven creativity is fragile. It seeks validation. It resists correction. Mason's work was pragmatic. If the pistol failed, he would discard it without hesitation. That mindset allowed honest testing and brutal self-critique, two things mockery often prevents. Ironically, ridicule strengthened his discipline. Since no one expected success, there was no audience to impress. Only reality remained. Another overlooked lesson lies in Mason's acceptance of risk. The wooden pistol was dangerous. He knew it. He accepted that danger, not recklessly, but proportionally. He understood that controlled risk was preferable to guaranteed helplessness. This is an uncomfortable truth. Safety is contextual. In stable systems, risk minimization is rational. In collapsing systems, excessive safety becomes lethal. Mason did not seek danger. He chose the least bad option available. His critics judged the pistol as if peacetime standards applied. Mason judged it by wartime reality. Many failures, military, organizational, personal, stem from applying the wrong standards to the wrong environment. Rules that protect you in normal conditions can kill you in abnormal ones. Another lesson emerges from how Mason disengaged. He did not pursue kills. He did not seek decisive confrontation. His goal was always movement, survival, control of tempo. This reflects a deeper strategic principle. Success is often defined by what you avoid, not what you defeat. Mason avoided fixation, avoided revenge, avoided the temptation to prove anything. Each engagement was a means, not an end. That discipline prevented escalation beyond his capacity. In contrast, the Germans escalated continuously. Every unanswered shot demanded explanation. Every report of resistance required reinforcement. Their need for certainty drove them deeper into error. This asymmetry reveals something important about power. Power seeks closure. Weakness survives through openness. The Germans needed to resolve the threat. Mason only needed to outlast their assumptions. There is also a cultural lesson embedded in the story. Mason's behavior reflected an American military tradition that values initiative at the lowest levels, not always explicitly, but structurally. Non-commissioned officers are trained to act when orders disappear. German doctrine, by contrast, emphasized coordination from above. That system produced impressive efficiency when intact, but it degraded rapidly when information became unreliable. Mason exploited that vulnerability unintentionally. This suggests a broader truth. Systems optimized for control often struggle against decentralized creativity. Centralization increases power, but reduces resilience. Mason's pistol was a decentralized solution in its purest form. One man, one tool, one decision loop. Modern warfare increasingly reflects this reality. Small units, asymmetric tactics. By solutions. The future looks less like massed formations and more like Mason's alleyways, fragmented, ambiguous, unpredictable. The wooden pistol anticipated that future. There is also a psychological lesson about belief. Mason never needed others to believe in the pistol, but he needed to believe in himself while carrying it. That belief was not blind faith. It was earned confidence grounded in testing. Belief without evidence is arrogance. Evidence without belief is paralysis. Mason balanced both. He trusted the pistol because he had verified its limits. He trusted himself because he had prepared for failure. When belief and evidence aligned, action followed naturally. Many people fail under pressure because belief collapses before evidence does, or because evidence exists but belief never forms. Mason aligned the two quietly, long before it mattered. Another lesson concerns legacy. Mason refused museums, refused publicity, refused myth-making. This was not modesty, it was clarity. He understood that objects distort lessons. People focus on artifacts instead of processes. A wooden pistol in glass becomes a curiosity. A wooden pistol in context becomes instruction. By letting the object fade, the idea remained alive. This is rare wisdom. Societies love symbols because they are easier than understanding. Mason denied society that shortcut. The result is that his story must be studied, not consumed. Finally, there is a personal lesson that extends beyond war. Most people wait for permission to adapt. Most people wait for validation to try. Most people wait for certainty before acting. Mason waited for none of these. He did not ask if he was allowed to solve the problem. He did not seek consensus. He did not demand guarantees. He acted within reality, accepted consequences, and adjusted continuously. That is not recklessness. It is responsibility. Responsibility means owning outcomes, not following rules blindly. It means acting when action is required, even if the solution looks absurd. The wooden pistol is uncomfortable because it strips away excuses. It removes the ability to say, "I had no tools." It removes the comfort of saying, "That wasn't my role." It removes the illusion that solutions must be approved to be valid. Mason's story insists on a harsher truth. When circumstances demand action, capability is defined by what you are willing to attempt. Not every attempt succeeds. Not every improvised solution works, but refusing to attempt guarantees failure. That is the final lesson. The wooden pistol was not genius. It was courage applied to thinking. And that combination, thinking plus courage, is far rarer and far more dangerous than any factory-built weapon. A third lesson emerges when Mason's story is examined through the lens of authority who is allowed to solve problems and when. In most organizations, especially military ones, authority flows downward. Decisions are expected to come from above. Initiative is praised in theory but constrained in practice. Soldiers are trained to act decisively within defined boundaries. Outside those boundaries, action becomes suspect. Mason crossed that invisible line. He did not receive permission to build a weapon. He did not request approval to modify ammunition. He did not inform ordnance officers. He acted autonomously in a space where autonomy was neither encouraged nor forbidden, just culturally discouraged. That gray zone is where real change often occurs. Institutions rarely fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because intelligence is trapped behind permission structures. When situations evolve faster than authority can respond, only those willing to act without explicit sanction can adapt in time. Mason understood something intuitively. When survival is at stake, responsibility precedes permission. This idea is uncomfortable for hierarchies. If everyone acts independently, systems fracture. But Mason's case shows the opposite danger. When everyone waits, systems collapse anyway. The solution is not anarchy. It is trust in judgment at the lowest level when context disappears. That trust cannot be created during crisis. It must be embedded beforehand, or individuals must take it upon themselves. Another lesson lies in how Mason evaluated success. He did not measure it by enemy dead alone. His objective was to regain initiative, stop being hunted, and start shaping the engagement. This reframing mattered. Many people mistake activity for progress. Mason understood leverage. 4 shots from a wooden pistol were insignificant tactically, but enormous strategically. They forced misinterpretation. Misinterpretation created delay. Delay created opportunity. Success is often indirect. This is a critical insight in any complex system. Outcomes rarely result from direct action alone. They emerge from second and third-order effects. Mason did not overpower the Germans. He disrupted their understanding of reality. Disruption scales faster than destruction. Another lesson concerns the danger of overconfidence born from superiority. German forces were better armed, numerically superior, and operating in familiar urban terrain. These advantages bred certainty. Certainty bred predictability. Mason exploited that predictability without intending to. This pattern repeats endlessly in history. Dominant forces become rigid because they believe advantage guarantees outcome. Weaker forces survive by becoming fluid. Flexibility is not a weakness, it is an adaptive weapon. The wooden pistol symbolizes this inversion. It was objectively inferior, but its very inferiority freed Mason from expectations. He was not bound by doctrine because his tool did not fit doctrine. That freedom is powerful. Another lesson emerges from Mason's refusal to romanticize the weapon. He never recommended others copy it. He never suggested it replace standard arms. He understood context. This restraint is crucial. Bad lessons spread when people generalize success without understanding conditions. Mason's pistol worked because of environment, timing, and preparation. Without those, it would have been suicide. Wisdom lies in knowing when not to apply an idea. Mason's story teaches discernment, not imitation. There is also a lesson about endurance. Mason's 6-hour evasion was not sustained by adrenaline. Adrenaline burns out quickly. Endurance came from pacing mental and physical. He moved deliberately. He rested when he could. He disengaged when advantage faded. This discipline prevented exhaustion-induced mistakes. In crises, speed feels necessary. Endurance is often more important. Another insight concerns learning under pressure. Mason learned continuously during the engagement. Each encounter refined his understanding of enemy behavior. He adjusted routes, timings, and engagement distances. Learning did not stop when fighting began. Many people freeze cognitively once action starts. Mason remained curious. That curiosity, why are they moving this way? Why are they reporting, that allowed him to stay ahead. Curiosity under threat is rare. It requires emotional regulation. This points to another lesson. Emotional control is a force multiplier. Mason did not suppress fear, he managed it. He allowed fear to sharpen awareness, not narrow it. Fear unmanaged leads to tunnel vision. Fear managed expands perception. Another lesson lies in how Mason's story survived. It did not survive because it was celebrated. It survived because it was useful. Soldiers repeated it because it offered guidance, not inspiration alone. Stories endure when they teach. This is why Mason's story reappears in training manuals, leadership courses, and informal instruction. It provides a template for thinking, not a myth to admire. Finally, there is a lesson about humility and victory. Mason never sought to prove the mockers wrong. He never sought revenge for ridicule. He accepted apologies without dwelling on them. This emotional economy preserved his clarity. Many people are driven by the desire to vindicate themselves. That desire consumes energy and distorts judgment. Mason invested energy only in survival and movement. Vindication came anyway. The deepest lesson of all may be this. True competence often looks unimpressive until the moment it matters. Quiet preparation is invisible. Unconventional thinking attracts ridicule. Contingency planning seems pessimistic until the day everything breaks. Then, suddenly, the person who prepared without applause becomes indispensable. Mason did not win because he was smarter than everyone else. He won because he was willing to think when thinking looked pointless and to act when action looked absurd. That combination is rare. Rarity, not the wooden pistol, is what made him dangerous. Spare parts depots, replacement crews, ships unloading new tanks by the hundreds. The Americans understood something essential. If the enemy is counting your losses, let them. As long as those losses do not degrade your future capacity, they are strategically irrelevant. The Sherman weaponized this illusion. It allowed the enemy to believe they were succeeding, while the system quietly prepared the next wave. This is why German intelligence consistently misread American strength. They analyzed wrecks, not replenishment rates. They measured destruction, not regeneration. They mistook noise for effect. The Sherman teaches that what matters in war is not what is destroyed, but what remains functional. There is also a lesson about speed of recovery versus speed of destruction. Many people assume victory comes from increasing lethality.